Welcome to another episode of Not for the Weak-Minded. This episode is about trying to show you snippets of knowledge about space-time and the number 3,600 years. Now, if you're familiar with Zecharia Sitchin's work, The 12th Planet, this is kind of where I've pulled that number from originally, and how there seems to be 3,600 year cycles involving time. Now, on this list, let's just go through this book, and this book is Atlantis Rising: The Struggle of Darkness. So what I'm going to try and show you is that the notion of what I'm trying to say to you is already out there. It's just that it needs to be interpreted differently. So Sitchin's interpretation of the one of the discs that he found, I can't remember exactly what it's called. His representation is that these beings are coming from space, which might be true as well. But what it actually was everything is based being on the perfect circle, and how that relates to 360 degrees, essentially. But his interpretation is still based on false principles of space, that is forever expanding, about the planets, etc. So when I'm trying to say that we need to build a foundation based upon sacred geometry, mathematics, this is kind of where I'm pulling the information from, but because I have a completely different interpretation of space, and that it's water, these numbers mean something completely different to me. So, as you can see, this is about the Annunaki, the Nibirians. Now, according to the Sumerian king list, the Nibirians first visited Earth around 450,000 years ago, and they've been regularly coming back in intervals every 3,600 years. Now, I did try and show you the Sumerian king list as well, and there is multiples of 3,600 years. So the Anunnaki are to do with beings coming down from the heavens, essentially, and they could be, in all intents and purposes, part of a federation of extraterrestrials, which includes ourselves, that come down and it's the changing of the guard, so to speak. So a lot of the people today, they're in this paradigm or paradox of, I can't explain it essentially, but there's the people in charge today are playing both sides. They're playing the darkness, but they're also playing the false light. And essentially, in order to go see that, like Lucifer worship, part of understanding that is to do with time itself, and how, as I've been trying to say, civilization through time, how knowledge is being used through time by good beings and by bad beings to build a contribution-based society, or to build a selfish society with money. So that's just the first book, and you can read it yourself, and I'm just trying to go through other books in a second where this information can be claimed at. So, calculating a 3,600 year cycle, it is clear that the lone planet is not scheduled back into our solar system in time for the Mayan date of 21st December 2012 AD. Now, of course, if time is out considerably, then all these prophecies associated with certain things might be associated with a time late coming, so to speak, because they've lied about time itself. This being current historical perspective of ancient history and recent history. So let's go back. Next one. This one here, again, is from a book, The High Strangeness of Dimensions, Densities, and the Process of Alien something. So the So if the weather on the planet can be manifestations of battle between entropy and creation, then an invasion might also be manifested in a natural way, as in Earth's upheavals, catastrophes, and fallen rocks from space. The Cassiopeans have discussed a number of different cycles that affect the Earth. There is a 3,600 year cometary cloud cycle that brings destruction of parts of the Earth from the sky. So this is something to bear in mind, and how they're using the current perspective of everything taught to get away with saying that asteroids are going to hit and this is part of the Nibiru. And in reality, it has everything to do with the returning of the gods and time itself and their arrival. So space-time, for some people, is too complicated when they're not basing it upon the perfect circle, and how they don't, and the numbers which relate to that would being 360, 36 and 18. So this one here, the wheel of time, again a wheel is the perfect circle, okay? And again in the Vedic texts, which again can be misrepresented, you still see 3,600 years cycle. Next, this one here, the time machine hypothesis, extreme science meets science fiction. And I'll just go down there. A sheaf of blue light flickered over their hulls, deep below the range of human hearing. A vast bell toll, glowing mist surrounded them, power being deployed around them to wrench a 3,600 year deep hole in the universe. So again, the notion of 3,600 years is being used and is known, but not really incorporated into understanding the cycles of space-time. So the demon planet that is supposed to trick goes by many names. Some call it Nibiru or Marduk, others named it the Ottawa object or Vulcan or Trans-Pluto, but most people prefer X or just Planet X or Planet X to be precise. Now, knowing that there's no such thing as planets, you have to see that this is something else. Now this relates to the winged disc, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha. It goes by many names across the earth, and their arrival every 3,600 years, the changing of the shift, so to speak. And essentially, in my personal opinion, these beings that come down actually control everything. They have manipulated humanity, and today they are the masters, you know. So yes, they came from space, but are they the good guys and the bad guys at the same time? You see, it's complicated. So it should be as big as many Earths, dwarfing it perhaps even hundreds of times. Some people think X, which is an elite letter, isn't even a real planet but a brown dwarf, a massive ball of dust and gas that almost succeeded in becoming a star. Nonsense. Planet X has something no other planet has, a huge orbit. Its orbit around the sun lasts 3,600 years. Now, considering the sun as a piece of technology and as a dome above our heads, that again is something you need to bear in mind. So this knowledge has come from ancient literature, but it means something completely different to what we've been told based upon our current perspective of space-time. Do you see? Most of the time it is far off and visible to the eye, but every 3,600 years the lost planet returns. Once here, it accelerates and swings close past the sun, disrupting everything it encounters. It can never happen because the sun is not a ball of gas. Next, in his kitchen, Mr. Sitchin pulled two Danish out of Zabar's bag and began to explain. It starts with the planet Nibiru, whose long elliptical orbit brings it near Earth once every 3,600 years or so. The planet's inhabitants were technologically advanced human-like beings, Mr. Sitchin said. Standing about 9 feet tall plus, some 450,000 years ago, they detected reserves of gold in Southeast Africa and made a colonial expedition to Earth, splashing down in what is now the Persian Gulf. Yes, this is to do, if you look at the work of Michael Tellinger, you'll see that there was massive mining of gold. But it doesn't necessarily mean what we think it to mean. Because obviously, you know, things occur every 3,600 years. And it's that part, and essentially this is part of understanding that time has an end and that all souls will be judged, and that is part of the great cycle of life and space-time. So this is how Mr. Sitchin explains what scientists attribute to evolution. He says the alien cities were washed away in a great flood 30,000 plus years ago, after which they began passing on their knowledge to humans. He showed a photograph of a wood carving from 7000 BC of a large man handing over a plough to a smaller man. The passing on of agricultural knowledge. Anyway, he said the Nibirites finally jetted home in their spacecraft around 550 BC. Technologies, right? UFOs, this is how it relates to history, and they've always been here, the Annunaki. They've never left. In fact, you know, they are playing both parts. They are manipulating humanity. The exciting atmosphere is so thin that it cannot retain energy from the sun. There are therefore extreme temperature contrasts between day and night, and sun or shade. However, most scientists agree that Mars was much warmer in the past and even had oceans, which means that the atmosphere was also very different. Now, Mars is not a planet, it's a cymatic pattern and frequency device using sounds. Now listen to this. They have placed the number 3,600, but all they've done is put millions of years ago. So about 3,600 million years ago, something happened and the planet evolved towards its current state. No, 3,600 years ago, almost. What could have triggered such a huge change in climate? We will answer this question with Mars Express explains. So, the evidence which they're present using as Mars is actually evidence on Earth too. That is part of understanding the Great Deception about how they're using technologies to deceive you about planets. Essentially, Parosists use 3 units of time to measure the duration of each king's reign. The Tsar of 3,600 years, the Nur of 600 years, and the Sos of 60 years. Using these measurements, he systemized the middle period of history between the first descent of kingship and the flood by allocating a clear symbolic duration of 120 Tsar, or a total period of 432,000 years. Do you see how 3,600 years fit into that perfectly? Now, this is not just Sitchin's work. There's loads of people out there that have done this work. But then it goes into millions of years, right? So, again, more deception. It is widely argued that the Great Year, as a cosmically measured period of history, took its cue from the astronomical advances of the 6th century BC onwards, the Persian and the Hellenistic periods, and the allocation of specific periods of time to planetary rulers. However, the truth is rather more complex. By Berosus' time, the Hellenistic world of Greece and the Near East was host to a number of different theories of what exactly constituted a great year. Some astronomical, some based on numerology, others a combination of 2. So they didn't know the truth either during the Greek and Hellenistic periods. Further support, so people, the Greeks believed it was a globe earth, and people use that knowledge today to go, well, the Greeks believed it was a globe earth, so it must be true, right? No, wrong. Deception. They lived in a great time of deception, just like we do today. So there we go. On that part, I'm not going to read the rest. So the Sumerian king list allegedly recorded all the rulers of Earth over 400,000 years who were said to be gods, demigods, or immortals, or one soul playing all the roles. In Sumerian mythology, the Annunaki were a pantheon of good and evil gods and goddesses, duality, who came to the earth to create the human race. This is what I'm trying to say, they play both sides, and they're manipulating humanity to play the both sides. According to some resources, these gods came from Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. The Syrians and Babylonians called it Marduk after their chief god. Sumerians said 1 year on planet Nibiru, a sar, was equivalent in time to 3,600 Earth years. Anunnaki lifespans were 120 sars, which is 120 times 3,600, or 432,000 years. That's not true. We today have a lifespan of 120 years, proven by science, but we have, in the past, they lived for a lot longer. You know, for example, Noah lived for 952 years old before being took up by the gods, etc. So lifespans has degraded, which is part of the theory of devolution and how that involves giants and extraterrestrials and creation, you know, a hybridization program of which we are part of. So this is more mathematical equations and other work, but just as in the first equation of the Greek mile above, the figure of 360,000 must be understood as 2 decimal place, extensions of the sexagonal division of 1 degree of the 360-degree circle. So you see they're using the perfect circle, and that creates the numbers 3,600, etc. So I'm hoping that you kind of see where I'm plucking the information from and how my interpretation of it is different, and how this relates to technologies and aliens coming back from the heavens, a new shift, so to speak, as I'm saying. So when we look at what the ancients knew from this picture, you'll realize that every single one of them, bar few, pictorially represents the earth as a dome and a perfect circle. So the earth is a perfect circle. NASA has mapped the earth using the perfect circle, which is the globe earth model, and yet you think the earth is a globe spinning, hurling around ridiculous speeds. That can never be true. It is a psyop created by the CIA so that they can get away with destroying the earth, because you don't think it's created, you don't think you got a soul, etc. You don't see that the earth is a perfect circle. Lastly, this is the United Nations map, and this is where my map's gonna go next, this way around, right? And I can't wait. So the United Nations knows the earth. They all know the earth based upon map the earth perfect circle. They know there's a dome. You know, they've been trying to break the glass ceiling of it, as Hillary Clinton said in multiple times. This is truth. We need to base everything back upon the perfect circle, 360 degrees, and those numbers associated with the power 3, 6 and 9. Sacred geometry. So please share, like and subscribe.